The first dog froze before the little girl even reached the auction floor. Nobody noticed it at first. Not the men holding bitter cards, not the retired handlers drinking stale coffee near the back wall, not the auctioneer standing beneath the fluorescent lights with a sales sheet in his hand. But former Navy SEAL Lucas Vale noticed because military dogs never froze. Not like that. The Belgian Malinois inside cage 7 had been pacing violently for 20 straight minutes, teeth bared at everyone who walked near him. Then suddenly, the dog stopped moving perfectly. His ears lifted, his breathing slowed, and its eyes locked onto the child standing near the entrance. The entire warehouse seemed to quiet around her. Lucas slowly lowered the paperwork in his hand. The girl couldn't have been older than 9. Thin winter jacket, dark braided hair. Small backpack hanging from one shoulder. Snow melting on her boots from outside. And somehow she looked completely calm inside a room full of dangerous retired military K-9s. The old auction warehouse sat on the edge of Blackwater Ridge, Colorado, buried between abandoned rail yards and frozen storage lots. Every year, private security companies quietly moved unfit retired working dogs through places like this. Dogs too aggressive, too traumatized, too expensive, too difficult to reassign. Officially, this was a legal retirement transfer facility. Unofficially, it was where broken military assets disappeared. Lucas hated the place the second he walked in. Now he hated it even more because the little girl standing alone near the entrance should have been terrified. Instead, she was studying the dogs like she knew them. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses. "Kid, you lost." The girl ignored him completely. Her eyes moved slowly across the cages, one by one. 10 elite retired K-9s, Belgian Malinois, German Shepherds, dual-purpose combat dogs. Every single one of them had military scars. Every single one of them had attack records. Every single one of them had failed rehabilitation. And now every dog in the warehouse was completely silent. Lucas felt the temperature shift inside the room. The handlers noticed it too. One man whispered, "What the hell?" Cage 3 still frozen. Cage 5, dog sitting now. Cage 9, Malinois lowering its head submissively. Impossible. These animals barely tolerated trained handlers. But the little girl took another step forward and all 10 dogs slowly sat at attention. Perfect military posture, perfect stillness. The auctioneer's gavel stopped midair. Nobody breathed. Lucas stared at the child carefully. Then his blood turned cold because one of the dogs recognized her. Not curiosity, recognition. The massive black German Shepherd in cage 1 stood slowly and walked to the bars. His eyes widened. Then the dog gave a soft sound deep in its throat. Not aggression, emotion. Lucas moved immediately. Years of SEAL instinct snapping awake. He stepped between the girl and the cages fast enough to make several bidders flinch. "You shouldn't be here." The child looked up at him calmly, gray eyes, sharp eyes, older than they should have been. "I know." Her voice was soft, controlled, no fear. Lucas glanced at the dogs, still frozen, still watching her. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then quietly answered, "Abigail." One of the retired handlers near the back suddenly dropped his coffee. The cup exploded across the concrete floor. Nobody looked away from the dogs because now every single canine in the room had shifted fully toward the little girl, locked in, focused, waiting. The black shepherd in cage 1 slowly pressed its nose against the bars. Abigail looked at it, then whispered one word, "Guardian." The reaction was instant. The dog dropped flat against the cage floor, submission posture, military obedience. The entire room exploded into noise. What the hell was that? How'd she do that? Is this some kind of trick? Lucas grabbed Abigail gently by the shoulder and moved her backward fast because suddenly every instinct he had was screaming the same thing. This was not normal. The auctioneer finally found his voice. "Who brought this kid in here?" Nobody answered. Abigail kept staring at the black shepherd. The dog never looked away from her. Lucas crouched slightly. "Where are your parents?" The girl stayed quiet. Wrong answer, very wrong answer. Lucas studied her more carefully now. Clean clothes, no visible injuries, but there was exhaustion behind her eyes and something else. Training, not military training, behavioral control, like someone had taught her never to panic no matter what happened. Lucas glanced toward the black shepherd again. Military tattoo scar near the ear, old combat damage along the shoulder. The dog's file photo suddenly clicked in his memory. Raven Unit Dog, classified assignment missing handler. The hair rose on Lucas's neck. He knew this dog not personally, but through whispers, stories operators told after too much whiskey and not enough sleep. The Raven units, experimental battlefield synchronization dogs, officially canceled years ago, officially. Lucas looked back at Abigail slowly. What did you just say to that dog? She looked confused. His name? Lucas's chest tightened. No, he said quietly, that's not his registered name. Abigail tilted her head slightly. Yes, it is. The room went silent again, the black shepherd stood, then another dog did the same, then another. All 10 K9s slowly rose together without taking their eyes off Abigail. Perfect synchronization, perfect formation response. Like soldiers awaiting command, one bidder backed toward the exit. I'm done. Screw this. Nobody stopped him. Lucas kept his attention on the child. Who taught you those commands? Her expression changed slightly. Fear, tiny but real. I'm not supposed to talk about home. Every SEAL instinct inside Lucas snapped hard at that sentence. Not supposed to. Conditioned language, the black shepherd suddenly barked once. Violent. Every dog in the warehouse immediately turned toward the upper catwalk overlooking the auction floor. Lucas spun instantly. Someone was watching them from above. Tall silhouette. Dark coat, still as stone. Then the figure disappeared. Lucas moved fast toward the stairs. Stay here. Abigail grabbed his sleeve. No. Lucas stopped, her voice lowered. He'll leave if you go alone. Cold spread through Lucas's stomach. Who? The girl looked toward the catwalk. The man who hurt them. Lucas hit the metal stairs hard enough to shake the entire catwalk. By the time he reached the top level, the shadow figure was already gone. Only cold air remained, and a half-open steel door leading toward the rear loading corridors. Lucas drew the pistol hidden beneath his jacket automatically. Old reflex. Below him, the auction floor had descended into chaos. Handlers trying to calm dogs, bidders shouting questions, auction staff arguing near the cages. But the dogs weren't aggressive anymore. That was the terrifying part. They were alert, watching, waiting, all focused on Abigail. Lucas moved through the loading corridor carefully. Concrete walls, rusted pipes, flickering industrial lights. Then he saw the footprints. Wet snow tracked across the floor toward the rear exit. Fresh, large, boot pattern, military tread. Lucas's jaw tightened. Somebody connected to Raven unit operations was here, which meant Abigail wasn't random. And neither was this auction. A soft voice echoed behind him. You shouldn't chase him. Lucas spun immediately. Abigail stood at the end of the corridor alone. How did you get up here? You walked loudly, not sarcasm, observation. Lucas stared at her. 9 years old maybe, but her eyes processed rooms like an operator clearing corners. Wrong, completely wrong. You came here alone? Yes. How? Bus. Lucas almost laughed from disbelief. What bus drops kids at retired military dog auctions? The church bus. That answer somehow felt worse. Lucas holstered the pistol slowly. Abigail, who are you? The girl looked toward the warehouse floor below. The dogs know. Lucas followed her gaze. All 10 K9s were staring upward at the catwalk now, directly at her. The black shepherd barked once. The others immediately sat, perfect obedience. Lucas whispered, Jesus Christ. Abigail looked at him carefully. You were military. Not a question. Lucas nodded slowly. Navy. The girl pointed toward the black shepherd below. He remembers your smell. Lucas froze. What? He remembers boats. The shepherd tilted its head slightly. Recognition. Lucas's pulse spiked. That dog had served with naval units, which meant Raven wasn't dead, just buried like every black program that failed publicly but survived privately. Lucas crouched in front of Abigail. Listen carefully. Did someone tell you to come here? No. Then why come? The girl looked toward the shepherd again. Because they were scared. Lucas felt that answer hit somewhere deep, not childish imagination, belief, absolute belief. Then Abigail whispered, he said the dogs were disappearing. Lucas's voice lowered carefully. Who said that? The man downstairs. Cold silence. Lucas stared at her. What man? The one nobody else sees. The fluorescent lights above them flickered hard, then went out. Darkness swallowed the corridor instantly. Below, the dogs erupted. Not barking wildly, military alert barking, threat detection. Lucas grabbed Abigail immediately and pulled her against the wall, footsteps, fast, moving somewhere above them. Another catwalk level. Lucas drew the pistol again. Then the emergency backup lights activated. Dim red glow flooding the warehouse, and every retired K9 below suddenly snapped into full attack posture, not toward Abigail, toward the auction staff. The black shepherd growled, deep, violent, focused. One handler near cage 4 slowly backed away. Too late. The Malinois inside slammed against the bars hard enough to bend metal. Lucas's instincts screamed instantly. The dogs weren't attacking randomly. They recognized something or someone. Abigail whispered beside him, "They know who worked there." Lucas looked down sharply. "Worked where?" The girl pointed toward the frightened handlers below. "The place with the white rooms." Lucas felt ice flood his veins. White rooms, interrogation phrase, behavioral conditioning phrase, experimental facility phrase. The black shepherd barked again. This time all 10 dogs moved together, not attacking, tracking. Every head turning slowly toward one man standing near the rear office door. Short, gray coat, auction clipboard in hand. The man froze under the attention of 10 elite military dogs. Then he ran. All hell broke loose. The black shepherd exploded through the cage door like a missile, metal tearing apart. The other dogs followed instantly. Handlers screamed. Bidders dove behind tables. Lucas shoved Abigail behind him and sprinted toward the stairs. The gray-coated man crashed through the rear warehouse exit into the snowstorm outside. The black shepherd was right behind him. Not random aggression, target pursuit. Lucas burst into the freezing night seconds later. Snow hammered sideways across the rail yard behind the auction house. The fleeing man slipped hard near the train tracks. The shepherd landed on him instantly. But instead of tearing his throat out, the dog pinned him, one paw across his chest, perfect control, military apprehension hold. Lucas reached them fast and shoved the pistol toward the man's face. "Who are you?" The man stared at the dog in pure terror. "It remembers." Lucas grabbed his collar violently. "Who are you?" The man's breathing broke apart. "Raven Facility Handler 12. Abigail stepped slowly out into the snow behind Lucas. The moment the handler saw her, his face completely collapsed. "No," the girl stared at him calmly. "You left them." The black shepherd growled harder. The handler started crying instantly, not from pain, fear, real fear, because somehow the little girl standing in the snow knew exactly what happened inside Raven Facility. And every retired military dog in that warehouse knew it, too. Snow swallowed Blackwater Ridge by midnight. The old auction warehouse looked buried alive beneath the storm. Emergency lights flashing red across the rail yard, while frightened bidders sped away into the mountains. Nobody wanted to stay near the dogs anymore, not after what they saw, not after 10 retired military K9s moved in perfect synchronization around one little girl like she was their commanding officer. And definitely not after Handler 12 started screaming the moment he recognized her. Lucas Vale dragged the trembling man back inside through the rear loading entrance, while the black shepherd followed directly behind them. Perfect heel position, perfect discipline. The dog never took its eyes off the handler once. Abigail walked beside the shepherd silently, calm, too calm. That bothered Lucas more than the screaming. Children weren't supposed to look this emotionally controlled around violence. The warehouse floor had transformed completely now. Auction tables overturned, coffee spilled everywhere. Handlers pressed nervously against walls, and the other 9 retired K9s sat perfectly still in formation around Abigail, watching, waiting. The auctioneer looked ready to faint. "Would I ask this?" Lucas ignored him. He shoved Handler 12 into a steel chair near the center office. The man immediately tried pulling away from the black shepherd. "Keep that thing away from me." The dog growled low, controlled, measured. Lucas leaned close. "Start talking." The handler shook violently. "You don't understand what she is." Lucas's voice dropped colder. "I understand enough to know you recognize her." The man's eyes darted toward Abigail standing quietly near the doorway. Fear, real fear, not guilt, not panic. Fear, that changed everything. Lucas noticed Abigail watching the other dogs now. One by one, the Malinois from cage 4 slowly approached her first, then lowered its head. Submission posture again. The little girl gently touched behind its ear. The dog closed its eyes instantly, like relief. Lucas turned back toward the handler. "What was Raven Facility?" The man swallowed hard. "A synchronization program. Meaning, no verbal commands. Lucas frowned. The handler continued shakily. They wanted dogs and operators reacting through behavioral pattern bonding instead of spoken instruction. Military synchronization. Lucas had heard rumors about projects like that, never confirmed, because the military denied everything connected to Raven. The black shepherd suddenly barked once. The handler flinched so violently the chair nearly tipped over. Abigail looked toward the dog, then quietly said, "He's lying." Silence crashed through the room. Lucas slowly turned back toward Handler 12. The man had gone pale. "He's not lying about Raven." Abigail whispered, "He's lying about the children." Every person in the warehouse froze. Lucas felt cold move down his spine. "What children?" the handler shouted instantly. There were no children. Wrong response, way too fast. Abigail stepped closer. The dogs immediately moved with her, not aggressively, protectively. 10 elite military dogs shifting formation around one little girl. The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, dangerous. Abigail stopped directly in front of Handler 12, then softly asked, "Why did they make us sleep in the white rooms?" The man stopped breathing. Lucas saw it happen, every ounce of blood draining from the handler's face. "No," the man whispered. "No, no, no." Abigail's expression never changed. "They said the dogs listen better when we were scared." One of the handlers near the wall muttered, "Jesus Christ." The black shepherd placed itself beside Abigail, the dog's shoulder brushing lightly against her leg, protective contact. Lucas crouched slightly. "Abigail, where is Raven facility?" The little girl looked confused. "It burned." Lucas's pulse tightened. "When?" "The night the walls started screaming." Nobody in the room moved. Nobody even breathed because the child describing a classified military program sounded less like a victim and more like someone remembering a nightmare she still lived inside. Handler 12 suddenly lunged upward from the chair. "You don't understand." Lucas slammed him back down instantly. The man pointed frantically toward Abigail. "She shouldn't exist." The black shepherd exploded forward with a violent snarl. Lucas barely caught the dog's harness before it tore the handler apart. Abigail whispered, "Guardian." The dog stopped immediately, complete obedience. The room went dead silent again. Lucas slowly released the harness. "How does she do that?" Nobody answered because nobody knew, not even Abigail seemed aware how terrifying it looked. The handler's breathing collapsed into panic. She was never supposed to survive synchronization. Lucas grabbed him hard. "What synchronization?" The man stared at Abigail like she was a ghost. Raven wasn't training dogs. The warehouse lights hummed softly overhead. Snow hammered the metal roof, and somewhere deep in Lucas's instincts, something terrible locked into place. The handler whispered, "They were training emotional command bonding." Lucas's grip tightened. "English." The man pointed toward Abigail. "They linked children to combat dogs." Several people in the room cursed aloud. One handler walked away entirely, like hearing it physically hurt. Handler 12 kept shaking. The dogs responded better to emotional anchors than military handlers. Lucas felt genuine rage rise inside him now. "You used kids." The man's eyes darted toward the black shepherd. "No," he whispered. "We used orphans." The room exploded. "What the hell, you sick bastard?" "They used children." Lucas slammed the handler against the chair hard enough to rattle teeth. "How many?" "I don't know. How many?" The man broke completely. 32. Abigail looked down quietly. 26. Everyone stopped. Lucas looked toward her slowly. The little girl stared at the floor. 6 disappeared in the tunnels. The black shepherd lowered its head beside her, like grief. Lucas suddenly realized something horrifying. The dogs weren't reacting to Abigail because she trained them. They remembered her. The storm outside intensified until the warehouse windows disappeared beneath white snow. Nobody left now. Not because they wanted answers, because fear glued them there. The handlers understood military dogs. Most were former law enforcement trainers or retired contractors. But what they saw tonight shattered every rule they believed about canine behavior. The dogs weren't obeying Abigail. They were emotionally connected to her, like soldiers finding someone they thought died years ago. Lucas paced slowly near the office while Handler 12 sat handcuffed to a steel support beam. The black shepherd never stopped watching him, not for 1 second. Abigail sat quietly on an old supply crate while 2 Malinois rested beside her feet. The dogs remained unnaturally calm around her. One even leaned gently against her shoulder. Lucas studied the scene carefully. Not dominance, not command, trust, absolute trust. And somehow that disturbed him more. The auctioneer finally found enough courage to speak. "You're telling me these dogs came from some kind of black site child experiment?" Handler 12 shook violently. "It wasn't supposed to become that." Lucas almost laughed coldly. "That's always how monsters explain themselves." The man lowered his head. "You don't understand, Raven." Abigail spoke softly from across the room. "The walls played music when children cried." Silence. The handler shut his eyes tightly. Lucas looked toward her. "What kind of music?" "Choirs." The black shepherd's ears twitched instantly at the word. Lucas noticed. Everything connected somehow. Choirs, synchronization, behavioral conditioning, military programs loved harmless-sounding names, made evil easier to file into paperwork. Lucas crouched near Abigail carefully. "You remember the place clearly?" The little girl hesitated, then nodded. "Mostly at night. Trauma memory patterns." Lucas knew enough psychology from combat debriefings to recognize it. "What do you remember?" Abigail looked down at the shepherd. "They paired us." "Paired who?" "Children and dogs." The warehouse stayed completely silent now. Even the handlers stopped moving. Abigail gently touched the shepherd's fur. "He stayed with me." The dog closed its eyes. Lucas asked carefully, "What's his real name?" The girl looked confused. "Guardian." "No," Lucas said quietly. "Military designation." Abigail's expression shifted slightly. Fear again, tiny, controlled. They hurt dogs who answered wrong. Jesus Christ. The black shepherd suddenly moved closer to her. Protective response. Lucas' chest tightened. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." The little girl looked toward him carefully. "You're different from the White Room men." Lucas frowned. "How?" "You stop being angry when dogs get scared." The sentence hit harder than expected because she observed emotional control like survival depended on it. Maybe it once did. Handler 12 suddenly whispered, "She shouldn't remember this much." Lucas stood slowly. "You drugged them." The man stared blankly ahead. Memory suppression cycles. One handler near the back cursed under his breath again. Lucas moved closer to the restrained man. "Who funded Raven?" The handler laughed weakly. "You think black projects have names attached?" Wrong answer. Lucas grabbed his jaw hard. "You think I haven't worked classified operations before?" That changed the handler's face immediately. Recognition. "You were Tier 1. Lucas said nothing. The handler swallowed. "Then you know how compartmentalization works." Yeah, Lucas knew. Programs buried under programs, dead-end authorizations. Rotating personnel. Nobody knowing the full picture except the people impossible to reach or impossible to kill. Abigail suddenly stood. Every dog in the warehouse immediately stood with her. The handlers backed away instinctively. The little girl looked toward the upper office windows overlooking the warehouse floor. "He's back." Lucas turned instantly. A silhouette stood behind the glass upstairs watching them, tall, motionless military posture. Then the office lights shut off. Lucas sprinted toward the stairs immediately. This time 3 handlers followed him, not brave, terrified. The upper office corridor smelled like cigarette smoke and wet wool. Lucas cleared the first room fast. Empty. Second room, empty. Third room. The office window overlooking the auction floor stood open, snow blowing inside, and on the desk sat a military photograph. Lucas grabbed it instantly. Black and white image, 6 handlers, 6 children, 6 combat dogs, Raven unit. His blood froze because Abigail stood in the center of the photo holding the black shepherd's leash. Smiling, not frightened, not broken, happy. Lucas stared harder. The photo couldn't be recent. Abigail looked exactly the same age now. One handler whispered behind him, "How old is that picture?" Lucas flipped it over slowly. Stamped date 11 years ago. Silence, complete silence. The handler beside him stepped backward. "That's impossible." Lucas felt ice move through his veins. 11 years, no aging, no visible difference. Abigail had not changed. Then he noticed something worse. One of the men in the photograph stood beside Abigail with a hand on her shoulder. Tall, military haircut, cold eyes. The exact same man Lucas saw watching them from the catwalk. Same face, not older, exactly the same. One of the handlers whispered, "He hasn't aged." The office lights flickered. Then the warehouse below erupted into barking, violent, explosive, protective. Lucas ran back toward the railing overlooking the floor. His heart nearly stopped. 3 armed men in gray tactical jackets had entered through the loading doors below. Suppressed rifles, no markings, military movement, and every retired K-9 in the warehouse had formed a wall around Abigail. Perfect formation. The black shepherd stood at the center, hackles raised, eyes locked on the armed men. One of the intruders spoke calmly, "Return the child." Lucas drew his pistol instantly. The entire warehouse froze between violence and silence. Abigail slowly looked up at the armed men, then whispered something so quietly Lucas barely heard it. Guardian protocol. The reaction was immediate. Every single dog in the warehouse attacked at once. The warehouse exploded into violence. 10 retired military K-9s launched forward in perfect synchronization like a living tactical unit unleashed from years of restraint. Not chaotic, not wild, precise. The armed men barely had time to react. The first intruder raised his suppressed rifle. Too slow. The massive black shepherd hit him center mass hard enough to drive him through a folding auction table. Metal snapped, wood splintered, the rifle skidded across the concrete floor. At the same instant, 2 Malinois took down the second man from opposite angles with terrifying precision. Locking onto arms and shoulders instead of throats. Controlled force, military apprehension training. Lucas moved instantly, years of combat instinct roaring awake. He vaulted the railing from the second-floor office and landed hard beside the nearest rifle, sliding across the concrete before grabbing it. The third intruder pivoted toward Abigail. Huge mistake. The little girl didn't scream, didn't run. She simply stood still while the dogs reacted around her like satellites protecting a command center. A retired shepherd slammed into the man's knees from behind. Another dog ripped the pistol clean out of his hand. The intruder crashed into the floor screaming. The handlers scattered in panic. Auction tables overturned everywhere. Emergency lights flashed red through the warehouse while snow blew in from the loading doors. Lucas shoved the rifle toward the nearest attacker. "Move and you die." The man froze, not because of Lucas, because the black shepherd stood over him now, silent, eyes locked directly onto his face, waiting. The intruder slowly lifted both hands. Abigail stepped forward quietly through the chaos. The dogs immediately cleared a path for her. Nobody in the warehouse missed that. Nobody would ever forget it. Lucas grabbed the nearest attacker by the tactical vest. "Who sent you?" The man said nothing. Then Abigail looked at him calmly and softly asked, "Did he tell you I was dead too?" The intruder's face changed instantly. Fear, real fear. Lucas caught it immediately. The man recognized her, which meant Raven facility wasn't buried. It was still active, or at least someone connected to it still operated in the shadows. The black shepherd suddenly growled low. Abigail tilted her head slightly. "He's lying." Lucas almost felt sick hearing that sentence again because somehow every time Abigail said it, she was right. Lucas slammed the attacker harder against the floor. "How many teams are outside?" Silence. The dog growled deeper. The man cracked instantly. 2 SUVs. Lucas looked toward the loading entrance where snow and darkness swallowed the rail yard outside. "Not good, very not good." One of the handlers shouted from near the office. "There's movement outside." Lucas moved fast toward the warehouse doors and looked through the snowstorm. Black vehicles, headlights off. Sliding between abandoned train cars beyond the lot. Professional approach. Military spacing, not contractors, operators. Lucas's pulse slowed automatically. Combat calm, the old SEAL inside him fully awake now. He looked back at the handlers. "Anyone here military besides me?" 2 men slowly raised their hands, former K-9 trainers. "Good enough," Lucas pointed fast. "Lock every side entrance." Then toward the remaining handlers. "Kill the lights except emergency red." Nobody argued. Fear made people obedient. Abigail still stood in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by the dogs, completely calm. The black shepherd remained beside her like a bodyguard carved from shadow. Lucas approached carefully. "You knew they were coming." The girl looked up at him. "He always sends men when dogs remember." Lucas frowned. Abigail hesitated, then whispered. "The tall man, the photograph, the catwalk silhouette." The man who hadn't aged in 11 years. Cold crawled down Lucas's spine. One of the restrained intruders suddenly laughed weakly from the floor. "You have no idea what she is." Lucas turned slowly. "No," he said coldly, "but I'm starting to understand what you are." The man's smile faded instantly. Good. Fear belonged to predators tonight. The storm cut the warehouse off from the rest of Blackwater Ridge completely. Snow buried the roads. Wind screamed against the steel walls hard enough to shake the building. And somewhere beyond the rail yard, more men waited in the dark. Lucas stood near the loading entrance studying the approaching headlights through narrow gaps in the metal shutters. Professional containment pattern. They weren't rushing. They expected retrieval. That meant one thing. They believed Abigail belonged to them. The thought alone made Lucas want to break something. Behind him, the warehouse had transformed into something surreal. The retired military dogs no longer acted like auction animals. They had formed rotating positions around Abigail naturally. Some resting, some watching entrances, some tracking sounds outside. Like an active security perimeter. One handler whispered, "They're guarding her." Lucas answered quietly, "No." He kept watching the dogs carefully. "They're protecting each other." That was worse, much worse, because military synchronization conditioning apparently worked, just not the way Raven intended. The black shepherd approached Lucas silently. The dog stopped beside him and stared toward the loading doors. Lucas crouched slowly. "You know they're out there too, huh?" The shepherd's ears twitched. Then the dog glanced back toward Abigail. Protective check. Lucas exhaled slowly. This animal had spent years surviving hell and somehow still chose loyalty. That wrecked him more than violence ever could. One of the former handlers approached nervously. "Those guys outside aren't security contractors." Lucas nodded once. "I know. You military? Used to be." The handler looked toward the storm. "They move like extraction teams, exactly, not killers first." Recovery teams, meaning Abigail mattered more alive. Lucas's mind turned fast now. Raven wasn't just a failed experiment. Someone still considered it valuable, which meant Abigail wasn't merely surviving witnesses. She was evidence, dangerous evidence. The restrained intruder suddenly spoke from the floor. "You can't keep her hidden." Lucas walked toward him slowly. "Watch me." The man shook his head weakly. "You think this ends at Blackwater Ridge?" Lucas crouched in front of him. "I think you're about 5 seconds away from losing teeth." The intruder smiled strangely. "You still don't understand the bonding program." Abigail looked toward him immediately. Fear crossed her face. Tiny but real, Lucas noticed. "What bonding program?" The man stared directly at Abigail. The children weren't paired randomly. The black shepherd growled instantly. The intruder's confidence cracked slightly, but he kept talking. Specific neurological responses, emotional imprinting, fear synchronization. Lucas's stomach tightened. The man continued. "They designed the children to stabilize combat dogs under battlefield stress." One handler whispered, "Dear God." Lucas looked toward Abigail slowly. What did they do to her? Nobody answered because Abigail suddenly covered her ears hard. The warehouse lights flickered violently. The dogs reacted immediately, all 10 snapping alert toward the ceiling speakers. A sound began humming softly through the building. Low frequency, almost musical. The black shepherd barked explosively. Every dog instantly became agitated. Lucas felt pressure behind his eyes immediately. Not pain, memory, combat memory, gunfire, smoke, screaming. He staggered slightly. "What the hell?" The intruder smiled weakly from the floor. Audio synchronization. Abigail whispered desperately, "Don't listen to the song." Lucas forced himself upright. The humming deepened through hidden warehouse speakers. One of the handlers suddenly dropped to his knees, clutching his head. Another stared blankly ahead. The dogs became restless now, not aggressive, confused. The black shepherd pushed hard against Abigail protectively. The little girl buried her hands in the dog's fur and softly whispered, "Guardian protocol." The dog immediately calmed, then something impossible happened. The shepherd barked once. The other dogs slowly stabilized, too. The humming lost power. Lucas stared in disbelief. The dog interrupted the conditioning, just like Ash interrupted the signals beneath St. Mercy Church. Loyalty overriding programming. Again, the intruder on the floor looked horrified now. "That's impossible." Abigail looked at him quietly. "No." Then softly, "They loved us first." The room fell silent, even the humming weakened. Lucas felt the truth of that sentence slam into him. Raven created emotional bonds thinking they were control mechanisms, but the dogs bonded for real. Not to commands, to children, to fear, to survival, to each other. The black shepherd suddenly turned toward the office catwalk above them, growling. Lucas looked up instantly. The tall man stood there again, watching, perfectly still beneath the red emergency lights. Same face as the photograph, not older by a single day. Lucas raised the rifle immediately. "Don't move." The man smiled faintly. Then the warehouse speakers activated again. This time the voice came directly through them. Calm, controlled, cold, return the girl, Chief Vale. Lucas froze. Nobody here used his old rank anymore. Nobody except classified personnel. The voice continued. "You were easier to predict than expected." Abigail's breathing changed instantly. Fear, real fear now. The black shepherd moved directly in front of her. The voice echoed through the warehouse. Raven Unit 7 has remained emotionally unstable since extraction failure. Lucas looked toward Abigail sharply. Unit 7, not a child's name, a designation. The voice continued. She belongs to federal property classification. Lucas's rage finally snapped. He fired toward the catwalk. The bullet shattered railing, but the tall man was already gone. The warehouse descended into full lockdown within minutes. Lucas ordered every entrance chained shut while snow buried the rail yard deeper outside. Nobody argued anymore, not after hearing the voice. Not after realizing federal operators were hunting a little girl like stolen military equipment. The handlers looked sick. Several wanted to leave, but none dared step outside. Not with armed teams surrounding the property. And definitely not with 10 elite combat dogs using to leave Abigail's side. Lucas stood near the center office studying the old Raven photograph again. 11 years old. Same faces, same dogs, same little girl, no aging, no explanation. Abigail sat quietly nearby, wrapped in a heavy blanket one of the handlers found for her. The black shepherd rested against her legs. Always touching her somehow, always checking. Lucas finally sat across from her carefully. "What's your real name?" The girl looked down, silence stretched, then quietly, "Unit 7. Lucas shook his head immediately. "No." The little girl slowly met his eyes. They stopped using names. Something inside Lucas broke a little hearing that. He leaned forward. "What did your parents call you?" Abigail hesitated longer this time, then whispered, "Emily." The black shepherd lifted his head immediately at the name. Recognition. Lucas felt rage burn hot behind his ribs. Because somebody erased children so completely even their dogs remembered their names better than they did. Emily looked toward the photograph in Lucas's hand. That was before the fire. Lucas studied her carefully. What happened the night Raven burned? The warehouse stayed silent around them. Even the handlers listened now. Emily's fingers tightened slightly in the blanket. The dogs heard screaming first. Lucas said nothing. Then the walls started singing. The same phrase again, walls singing, conditioning audio, synchronization frequencies. Emily looked toward the black shepherd. Guardian broke his door. The dog's ears twitched. He came back for me. Lucas felt cold settle into his chest. The girl continued softly. The other dogs started breaking cages too. One handler whispered, "My God." Emily stared past Lucas now, lost inside memory. Everything was red, fire alarms. Emergency lights, smoke. The men tried stopping the dogs. The black shepherd gave a low growl. Emily gently touched his neck. They hurt him. Lucas noticed old scar tissue beneath the dog's fur now, burned scars, bullet graze near the shoulder. Jesus. Emily's voice trembled slightly for the first time. Guardian carried me outside. The warehouse lights flickered again. Everyone tensed instantly, but no humming came this time. Only wind. Lucas leaned closer carefully. "What happened after the fire?" Emily looked confused. "I ran for 11 years. She nodded once. The handlers exchanged uneasy glances. Impossible. A child surviving alone for 11 years was already unbelievable, but not aging. That crossed into nightmare territory. Lucas asked carefully, "Did Raven do something medical to you?" Emily stayed quiet. Wrong silence. Very wrong silence. The black shepherd suddenly stood. Every other dog in the warehouse immediately reacted. Alert posture. Tracking. Lucas heard it half a second later. Vehicles, engines outside, multiple. The handlers rushed toward the windows. Black SUVs sliding into the rail yard through the storm. No headlights. Military approach spacing. Lucas grabbed the rifle immediately. How many? 4 vehicles, not retrieval anymore. Containment. The warehouse speakers crackled softly again. Then the same calm voice echoed through the building. Last opportunity, Chief Vale. Lucas moved toward the loading entrance. "Come take her." The voice ignored the threat completely. Unit 7 survival has compromised national continuity protocols. One handler whispered, "What the hell does that mean?" Lucas knew or guessed enough. Raven didn't fail because children died. Raven failed because the children survived. Emily suddenly whispered behind him, "They can't let the dogs remember." Lucas turned sharply. "What?" The little girl looked terrified now. "The dogs remember what happened underground." Silence crashed through the room. Underground, not facility rooms, not labs, underground. Lucas felt another piece lock into place. Raven facility wasn't the original site, just the continuation, like St. Mercy Church. Like choir, like somebody kept rebuilding the same horror under different names. The black shepherd barked violently toward the warehouse floor. Lucas followed the dog's gaze. One of the restrained intruders was smiling again. "Bad sign, very bad sign," the man whispered softly. "You still haven't asked why the dogs froze when she spoke." Lucas slowly walked toward him. The intruder's smile widened because the synchronization wasn't based on commands. The warehouse lights dimmed red again. The man's eyes shifted toward Emily. Then he whispered, "It was based on recognition." The warehouse fell silent after the intruder's final sentence. It was based on recognition. Snow hammered the steel walls outside while red emergency lights washed over the cages. The handlers, the dogs, and the little girl sitting beneath a military blanket beside the black shepherd. Lucas Vale stared at the restrained man. Recognition, not commands, not obedience. The dogs froze because they remembered her, not Unit 7, Emily, the child they had protected inside Raven facility before the fire buried everything. Lucas felt rage settle into something colder now. Focused, controlled, dangerous. He crouched in front of the intruder slowly. Recognized her as what? The man smiled weakly through split lips. The center. Lucas's expression hardened, meaning the intruder looked toward Emily. Every Raven unit child anchored a pack group. One of the handlers muttered, "Jesus." The man continued, "The dogs weren't conditioned to obey children." Pause. They were conditioned to emotionally stabilize around them. Lucas finally understood why the warehouse changed the second Emily walked in. The dogs didn't see a stranger. They saw home. The black shepherd suddenly lifted his head sharply toward the loading doors. Every dog reacted instantly. Alert posture. Low growls spreading through the warehouse like thunder rolling across metal. Lucas moved toward the front windows and looked through the blowing snow. The black SUVs had stopped completely now. Engines idling. No movement, too still, professional stillness. Then warehouse lights appeared across the rail yard, portable flood lamps, white beams cutting through the snowstorm. Containment set up. The handlers started panicking immediately. "They're surrounding the building. How many are out there? We need to leave." Lucas turned sharply. "No one opens those doors." The old SEAL command voice hit hard enough to stop everyone cold. "Good. Panic got people killed." Emily stood slowly from the supply crate. The dogs instantly tightened formation around her. The black shepherd pressed directly against her side. Protective contact again. Lucas noticed her breathing change. "Fast now. Fear rising." "What is it?" Emily whispered. "He came this time." Lucas felt ice slide through his stomach. The tall man, she nodded once. The warehouse speakers crackled softly. Then the calm voice returned. "Good evening, Emily." The little girl flinched violently. The dogs erupted immediately. Barking, growling, moving toward the ceiling speakers. Lucas grabbed the rifle tighter. "Show yourself." The voice ignored him. "You've caused extraordinary inconvenience." Emily's face lost all color. Lucas moved beside her. "You know him?" Pause. Then very quietly he made the white rooms. The handlers stared in horror. The voice through the speakers softened strangely. "You survived longer than projected." Lucas's jaw tightened. Projected, like she was never human to them. Emily buried shaking fingers into the black shepherd's fur. The dog stayed perfectly still for her, grounding her, keeping her steady. The voice continued. "Return voluntarily and no further assets need to be terminated." Lucas almost laughed coldly. "Assets?" The speaker crackled. "Chief Vale, you of all people should understand operational necessity." Lucas answered instantly. "I understand monsters hiding behind classified paperwork." Silence. "Then you were selected for Raven Review once." Lucas froze, every muscle locked. "What?" The voice remained calm. "You declined advancement after the Jakarta extraction." Old memories slammed hard into Lucas's chest. Smoke, floodwater, dead civilians, a classified operation buried so deeply even most SEAL teams never heard about it. Lucas whispered, "How do you know about Jakarta?" The answer came immediately, because Raven evaluated every operator exposed to emotional compromise. The handlers exchanged nervous looks. Emily looked confused. "What's emotional compromise?" Lucas stared into the darkness beyond the windows, then quietly answered, caring. The storm outside intensified until the warehouse shook beneath the wind. Floodlights surrounded the building now, long white beams cutting through the snow like prison towers. Lucas counted silhouettes moving between train cars. At least 12 operators, maybe more. Not law enforcement, not contractors, military. Emily sat on the floor beside the black shepherd while the dogs remained tightly grouped around her. Lucas noticed something disturbing now. The closer danger got, the tighter the dogs synchronized. Shared emotional response, shared protective instinct. Raven hadn't created attack animals. They accidentally created emotional packs. The warehouse speakers crackled again. "Emily." The girl shut her eyes instantly. The voice continued softly. "Guardian cannot protect you forever." The black shepherd growled deep enough to vibrate the concrete floor. Lucas stepped toward the center office controls. "Can we kill the speakers?" One handler shook his head. "Whole warehouse systems integrated." "Of course it was." The voice echoed again. "You were always the strongest Bond candidate." Emily whispered, "Don't listen." Lucas turned toward her. "What does that mean?" The little girl looked terrified now. "He changes memories." Cold silence spread across the warehouse. The handlers looked at each other nervously. Lucas crouched beside her carefully. "How?" Emily touched the side of her head. "The songs, audio conditioning, hypnotic reinforcement, behavioral synchronization." Lucas had heard rumors of programs experimenting with frequencies affecting stress response in combat zones. But this was beyond anything he imagined. The black shepherd suddenly stood and barked sharply toward the loading doors. Then all 10 dogs moved simultaneously. Formation. Protective wall facing the entrance. Lucas's pulse slowed instantly. Contact incoming. Heavy footsteps outside, metal scraping. One of the handlers whispered, "They're breaching." Then the warehouse lights died completely. Darkness swallowed everything. Emily gasped softly. The dogs growled low in the blackness. Lucas moved immediately beside her. "Stay close." Emergency red backup lights flickered on 1 second later, and standing beyond the loading door windows was the tall man. Perfectly still in the snowstorm, gray coat, black gloves, no visible weapon, the same face from 11 years ago, not aged a day. The handlers backed away instinctively. The man looked directly at Emily through the glass, then softly spoke into the warehouse speakers, "Come home." The little girl started shaking hard. The black shepherd pressed against her immediately. Lucas stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "Director Nathan Cole." The name hit several handlers instantly. One whispered, "That's impossible." Lucas glanced sideways. "You know him." The handler looked pale. "Nathan Cole died in a facility fire in 2015. The man outside smiled slightly wider. "Officially." Emily buried her face briefly against the shepherd's neck. Lucas studied Cole carefully now. No visible aging, no stress response, perfect posture. Something about him felt wrong, artificially controlled, like a man who spent too long inside his own experiment. Cole spoke calmly through the speakers again. "Emily's neurological pattern remains federal property." Lucas answered coldly, "She's a child." Cole tilted his head slightly. She stopped being a child inside Raven. The black shepherd barked violently. Cole's eyes shifted toward the dog. Actual hatred crossed his face. "Guardian should have been terminated after the breach." Emily whispered quietly, "He saved us." Cole ignored her. "No, he infected the synchronization model." Lucas frowned slightly. Infected, Cole's expression hardened. The dog developed reciprocal attachment instead of controlled dependency. One handler whispered, "The dogs loved the kids." Cole answered immediately, "Yes," like it disgusted him. Lucas finally understood the true horror. Raven failed because emotional bonds became real. The dogs chose loyalty over conditioning, and somehow so did the children. Cole looked directly at Emily again, returned voluntarily. Emily shook her head immediately. The black shepherd stood taller beside her. Cole's face became emotionless again. Then containment begins. The warehouse exploded. Charges detonated against the loading doors hard enough to shake the building. Handlers screamed. Metal warped inward. Floodlights outside intensified through the snowstorm. And the dogs moved as one, not chaos, not panic, protective tactical response. Lucas grabbed the rifle and shouted, "Get down!" The loading doors burst inward. Armed operators stormed through smoke and snow. Suppressors, night vision, military precision. The first operator barely crossed the threshold before 3 Malinois hit him simultaneously. Another tried, raising his weapon toward Emily. The black shepherd launched across the warehouse like a missile. Lucas fired twice. Controlled shots, legs, shoulders disabling. The warehouse became pure violence under flashing red emergency lights. Dogs barking, men shouting, snow blowing through broken doors. Emily stayed exactly where she was, and somehow the dogs kept every operator away from her. Like the entire pack shared one purpose: protect her. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes, but to Lucas Vale, it felt like an hour stretched across gunsmoke, barking, and red emergency lights. The operators were better trained than contractors. Fast, disciplined, precise, but they hesitated around the dogs. That hesitation cost them everything. The retired K-9s moved like living battlefield memory. Years of combat instinct returning all at once. Not killing, neutralizing, protecting. Lucas slammed one operator into a steel cage hard enough to knock the rifle loose, then spun toward Emily instantly. The black shepherd stood over her like a wall of muscle and fury. Blood streaked across its shoulder now, not fatal but enough to make Emily panic. Guardian. The dog turned toward her immediately, calmed, even wounded. Lucas felt something brutal twist inside his chest. Raven tried building emotional synchronization through fear, but fear wasn't what survived. Love did. The warehouse speakers crackled violently. Nathan Cole's voice echoed again. Enough. Everything paused, even the operators. Cole slowly entered through the shattered loading doors while snow blew behind him in white spirals. No weapon visible, no body armor, just absolute calm. The dogs reacted instantly. Low growls spreading across the warehouse floor. The black shepherd stepped directly in front of Emily. Cole stared at the dog with cold fascination. You were the flaw. Lucas aimed the rifle center mass. Stop walking. Cole ignored him completely. The entire Raven model collapsed because of one animal's attachment response. Emily's hands trembled against the shepherd's fur. Cole looked toward her. You were supposed to regulate aggression patterns. The little girl whispered, "We were children." For the first time, Nathan Cole hesitated. Tiny, almost invisible, but Lucas saw it. Cole's voice softened strangely. You were necessary. Wrong answer, always the wrong answer. Lucas stepped closer. You experimented on orphans. Cole looked toward him calmly. I prevented emotionally unstable combat failure. Lucas almost laughed from disbelief. You tortured kids. Cole's expression never changed. History only remembers successful outcomes. The black shepherd barked once, sharp, violent. Cole ignored him. The synchronization evolved beyond prediction. Emily slowly stepped forward from inside the circle of dogs, small, terrified, shaking, but brave anyway. Why did you keep coming back for us? Cole looked at her silently for several seconds, then answered honestly, because if people learned Raven succeeded. Lucas frowned. Succeeded? Emily whispered, we weren't supposed to survive. Cole nodded once. Exactly. The warehouse fell silent except for wind outside. Then Lucas finally understood. Raven wasn't considered failure because children died. Raven was considered failure because emotional attachment worked too well. The dogs became loyal beyond programming. The children became emotionally linked beyond conditioning. They became family, and no military system on Earth could fully control family. Cole looked toward the black shepherd again. You should have obeyed. The dog growled low. Emily gently touched his neck, then softly whispered, he did. Cole frowned slightly. Emily's voice shook but stayed steady. He obeyed us. Silence. Real silence this time. Even the storm outside seemed distant suddenly. Lucas watched Nathan Cole carefully. For the first time, the man looked old. Not physically, spiritually. Like decades of control finally cracked under one simple truth. The dogs chose humanity willingly. Cole looked around the warehouse slowly. At the handlers, at the wounded operators, at the dogs protecting one frightened little girl, then quietly asked, what do you think happens now? Lucas answered immediately, the truth. Cole almost smiled sadly. No, pause. The truth disappears faster than people. Then the warehouse emergency lights suddenly died again. Total darkness. Gunshots erupted instantly. Handlers screamed. Dogs exploded into barking. Lucas grabbed Emily and hit the floor hard beside the black shepherd. Flashlights flickered wildly through the darkness. Someone was trying to extract Cole. Lucas heard boots moving toward the loading doors. Then the black shepherd lunged. A man screamed. Metal crashed. Lucas fired toward movement. The emergency lights returned 2 seconds later. Too late. Nathan Cole was gone, so were 2 operators. Snow blew through the shattered loading entrance while the remaining men surrendered completely under rifle fire and 10 furious military dogs. Lucas lowered the weapon slowly. The black shepherd limped back toward Emily immediately. Alive, still protecting her, always protecting her. Emily wrapped both arms around the dog's neck and broke down crying for the first time all night. Not controlled tears, not silent fear, real crying, like finally being allowed to become a child again. The warehouse stayed quiet around her. Nobody interrupted because every person there understood something important now. The dogs froze when Emily spoke because she wasn't their handler. She was their family. Lucas stared out into the snowstorm where Nathan Cole disappeared and quietly realized the story wasn't over, not even close. But for tonight, Emily was safe, and every retired military dog in Blackwater Ridge had decided exactly who they belonged to.